The train whistle pierced the dawn silence like a sharpened blade, and Lila Thompson's heart leapt to her throat as rough hands yanked her toward the eastbound locomotive. Dallas, Texas was the only home she'd ever known, and now they were tearing her away from it, all because they couldn't understand her grief. "Get moving, you troublesome woman," growled Sheriff Daniels, his meaty fingers digging into her upper arm as he hauled her across the platform. "That asylum in Philadelphia will straighten you out proper." Lila's golden brown hair hung in tangled waves around her face, which was streaked with dirt and tears. Once the belle of Dallas society, now she was being shipped off like damaged goods, her wrists bound with leather restraints that bit into her skin. "Please," she begged, voice hoarse from days of crying, "I'm not insane. I just need time. Time's up, Miss Thompson," the sheriff cut her off. 3 months of your screaming in the night, wandering the streets talking to ghosts and frightening decent folk. The town councils made their decision. Behind them trudged Dr. Wilcox, the town physician, carrying her single valise. His expression was a mask of professional detachment as he clutched the commitment papers in his other hand. "It's for your own good, Miss Thompson. The Eastern State Asylum has excellent treatments for female hysteria and melancholia." Lila knew what those treatments entailed: cold water therapy, restraints, electric shocks. Her cousin had gone to such a place after her husband died and had returned a hollow shell of herself, docile as a lamb and empty as a dried gourd. The train belched another cloud of steam and the conductor called for final boarding. Sheriff Daniels practically lifted her off her feet in his haste to deposit her onto the steps of the passenger car. "Wait," the voice rang out across the platform, deep and authoritative. All heads turned to see a tall figure striding toward them, spurs jingling with each determined step. Adam Ransom cut an imposing silhouette against the rising sun, his broad shoulders squared beneath a dust-covered duster, Stetson pulled low over piercing blue eyes. "Sheriff," Adam said, coming to a stop before them, "I believe you're making a grave mistake." Sheriff Daniels scowled. "This ain't your concern, Ransom. Town council's orders." Adam's gaze shifted to Lila, taking in her disheveled appearance, the fear in her amber eyes, the restraints on her wrists. Something in his expression softened. "She's not crazy," he stated firmly. "She's just hurting." Lila stared at him in disbelief. Adam Ransom was little more than an acquaintance, a skilled cowboy who worked at the Broken Arrow Ranch outside of town. They'd exchanged pleasantries at church socials and market days, nothing more. Yet here he stood, defending her sanity with unwavering conviction. Dr. Wilcox stepped forward, commitment papers clutched to his chest like a shield. "Mr. Ransom, I assure you Miss Thompson's diagnosis is sound. Following the tragedy, her behavior has become increasingly erratic, and following the tragedy," Adam emphasized, cutting him off, "which would break anyone. 6 months ago, she lost her entire family in that fire. Her parents, her little brother, everything she had. And instead of giving her the time to grieve, you're shipping her off to be locked away and forgotten." The sheriff's grip on Lila's arm tightened. "The decision's been made. Step aside, cowboy." Adam didn't move. Instead, he reached inside his coat and pulled out a folded document. "I have here a legal alternative, signed by Judge Harrington last evening." The sheriff snatched the paper, eyes narrowing as he read. "What is this nonsense? Miss Thompson can be released into the custody of a responsible party willing to oversee her care," Adam explained calmly. "Judge Harrington agreed that institutionalization isn't necessary if she has proper supervision." Dr. Wilcox peered over the sheriff's shoulder at the document. "And who exactly is this responsible party?" "That would be me," Adam said firmly. Lila gasped. "Mr. Ransom, you can't possibly." "I can and I will," he answered without looking at her, his eyes still locked with the sheriff's. "My sister Sarah is arriving from Austin next week. She's a trained nurse. Between the two of us, Miss Thompson will receive better care than any asylum could provide." The sheriff sputtered. "You can't just—" "It's all legal, Sheriff. Judge Harrington's signature makes it binding." Adam extended his hand. "Now, I believe those restraints should come off." For several tense moments, no one moved. The train whistle blew again, more insistent this time. The conductor shouted, "All aboard, final call," With a muttered curse, Sheriff Daniels reluctantly unlocked Lila's restraints. On your head be it, Ransom. When she sets fire to your place or wanders off a cliff in one of her spells, don't come crying to me. As the leather straps fell away, Lila rubbed her raw wrists, unable to believe what was happening. She'd resigned herself to her fate, had prepared mentally for the horror of institutionalization. And now, this man, this virtual stranger, had stepped in like some knight from a storybook. Adam took her valise from Dr. Wilcox, who still appeared thoroughly displeased. I'll need her medical records sent to my ranch by week's end, the cowboy said in a tone that brooked no argument. This is highly irregular, the doctor protested. So is locking away a grieving woman because her sorrow inconveniences the town, Adam replied evenly. The train began to move, pistons firing and wheels grinding against the tracks as it pulled away from the station. Sheriff Daniels and Dr. Wilcox retreated, both men glaring at Adam as if he'd stolen something valuable from them. When they were alone on the platform, Lila finally found her voice. Why? She asked simply, searching his face for answers. Why would you do this for me? Adam's expression was unreadable as he adjusted his hat. Let's get you to the ranch. You look like you could use a proper meal and some rest. He offered his arm, but Lila hesitated. Mr. Ransom, I appreciate your intervention, truly I do, but I can't impose on you this way. You don't know what you're taking on, I'm not. I haven't been well. Miss Thompson, he said gently, I know exactly what I'm taking on, and I know grief when I see it. What you need isn't electric shocks and ice baths. What you need is time and space to heal. Something in his words, in the quiet understanding behind them, broke through the wall she'd built around herself. Tears filled her eyes, but for the first time in months they weren't tears of despair. Thank you, she whispered. His only response was a slight nod as he guided her toward a wagon parked at the edge of the station. As they pulled away, Lila caught a glimpse of her reflection in a store window, pale, thin, with shadows under her eyes that made her look like a ghost herself. She hardly recognized the woman staring back at her. What kind of life awaited her at the Broken Arrow Ranch? And what would this cowboy expect in return for his kindness? Questions swirled in her mind, but the gentle rocking of the wagon and the exhaustion of the morning's events soon lulled her into an uneasy sleep. She dreamed, as she often did, of flames consuming everything she loved. But this time, through the smoke and fire, a hand reached out to pull her to safety. The journey to the Broken Arrow Ranch took nearly 2 hours, winding through rolling plains dotted with mesquite and live oak trees. When Lila awoke, they were passing through a sturdy wooden gate topped with a wrought iron arrow broken in the middle of the ranch's namesake. We're here, Adam said simply, guiding the horses down a well-worn path toward a sprawling ranch house nestled against a backdrop of gently sloping hills. Lila sat up straighter, taking in her surroundings. The 2-story house was larger than she'd expected, painted white with dark green shutters, a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Several outbuildings dotted the property, a barn, bunkhouse, smokehouse, and what appeared to be a small workshop. In the distance, cattle grazed in fenced pastures. It's beautiful, she murmured, surprised by how peaceful it felt after the chaos of the morning. Adam's expression softened slightly. Been in the Ransom family for 3 generations. My grandfather built the main house, my father expanded the ranch lands, and I've been trying not to ruin their hard work. As they pulled up to the hitching post near the house, the front door swung open, and an older woman with steel gray hair pulled into a tight bun emerged onto the porch. Her weathered face creased with curiosity as she wiped her hands on her apron. Mrs. Hollister, Adam called out as he set the brake. We have a guest who will be staying with us for a while. The woman's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline as Adam helped Lila down from the wagon. This would be the urgent business that took you to town at dawn, I reckon, she said, her voice carrying a hint of disapproval mixed with unmistakable curiosity. Mrs. Hollister, this is Miss Lila Thompson from Dallas. Miss Thompson, this is Mrs. Martha Hollister, the finest housekeeper in all of Texas, and the woman who's kept this ranch running smoothly since before I was born. Mrs. Hollister's shrewd eyes took in Lila's disheveled appearance, from her wrinkled dress to her tangled hair. Well, miss, you look like you've had quite a morning. Come inside and I'll fix you something to eat while Mr. Ransom explains himself. She shot Adam a look that suggested he had considerable explaining to do. Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly elegant yet comfortable, with sturdy furniture, polished wood floors covered with colorful rugs, and large windows that filled the rooms with natural light. Mrs. Hollister led them to a spacious kitchen at the back of the house, where the smell of fresh bread and coffee permeated the air. Sit, both of you, the housekeeper commanded, pulling out chairs at the large oak table. Miss Thompson looks ready to collapse, and you, Mr. Ransom, have that look about you that says you've gone and done something impulsive again. Adam removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair. It wasn't impulsive, Mrs. Hollister. It was necessary, as Mrs. Hollister placed a cup of steaming coffee in front of her. Lila wrapped her cold fingers around the warm mug, drawing comfort from its heat. Mr. Ransom intervened when the town council was sending me to an asylum back east, she explained quietly. I'm afraid I've been unwell. Since losing my family, understanding dawned in Mrs. Hollister's eyes. The Thompson fire, I heard about that tragedy, terrible business. She clucked her tongue sympathetically before turning a questioning gaze to Adam, and your solution was to bring her here. Judge Harrington approved her release into my custody, Adam explained, accepting his own cup of coffee. Sarah will be here next week to help with her care. Mrs. Hollister's expression softened slightly. Well, that's something, at least. She turned back to Lila. You drink that coffee, miss, and I'll have some breakfast for you in a jiffy. You're thin as a rail. As the housekeeper busied herself at the stove, Adam leaned toward Lila. Mrs. Hollister may seem stern, but she has the kindest heart in Texas. Her bark is worse than her bite. I heard that, Mr. Ransom, the older woman called without turning around. And you do well to remember my hearing is just fine. A ghost of a smile touched Lila's lips, the first in months, but faded quickly as the weight of her situation pressed down on her again. Mr. Ransom, she said quietly, I'm grateful for your intervention, but I don't understand why you've taken this responsibility upon yourself. We barely know each other. Adam studied her face for a long moment before answering. My younger brother, Matthew, came back from the war changed. Jumping at shadows, waking up screaming, sometimes not knowing where he was. The town wanted to send him away too, said he was dangerous, but he wasn't crazy, he was hurting. His jaw tightened. No one deserves to be locked away for their pain. What happened to him? Lila asked softly. A shadow passed over Adam's features. He found his peace eventually. Took nearly 2 years, but he found his way back to himself. He didn't elaborate further, but the loss in his eyes told her enough. Mrs. Hollister returned to the table with plates of eggs, bacon, and fresh bread. Eat now, talk later, she instructed. Miss Thompson needs her strength. Lila hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was before her. The sheriff had pulled her from her bed at dawn, giving her barely enough time to dress before dragging her to the station. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing appetite as her body remembered what it was to be properly nourished. When you've finished, Mrs. Hollister said, I'll show you to your room. You can rest, and I'll draw a bath for you this afternoon. Thank you, Lila replied, genuine gratitude in her voice. I don't want to be a burden. Nonsense, the housekeeper said firmly. This house has been lacking a feminine presence since Mr. Ransom's mother passed. God rest her soul. It'll do us all good to have another woman about the place. Adam rose from the table, placing his hat back on his head. I need to check on the new calves in the north pasture. Mrs. Hollister will get you settled in. We'll talk more this evening, Miss Thompson. After he'd gone, Mrs. Hollister sat across from Lila with a cup of coffee for herself. Now, miss, I won't pry into your troubles, that's not my way. But if you're to stay here, there are things I should know. Any ailments that need tending? Medicines you require? Lila shook her head. No, nothing like that, it's just… She hesitated, unsure how to explain what even she didn't fully understand. I have nightmares, terrible ones. Sometimes I wake not knowing where I am, thinking I'm still in the fire, trying to save them. Her voice broke. Mrs. Hollister reached across the table and patted her hand. Grief does strange things to a person, miss, nothing to be ashamed of. I hear them sometimes, Lila confessed in a whisper. My mother calling my name, my little brother laughing. I know they're not real, but they sound so close. She looked up, expecting to see judgment or fear in the older woman's eyes, but found only compassion. After my Henry passed, Mrs. Hollister said, I'd set his place at dinner for months, even carried on conversations with him sometimes. Heart takes time to catch up with what the head knows. For the first time since the fire, Lila felt something other than crushing isolation. Someone understood, or at least didn't think she was mad for her grief. True to her word, Mrs. Hollister showed Lila to a lovely room on the second floor with windows overlooking the eastern pastures. The walls were painted a soft blue, the furnishings simple but elegant, a four-poster bed with a handmade quilt, a cherrywood dresser, a small writing desk by the window, and a rocking chair in the corner. This was Sarah's room whenever she visited, Mrs. Hollister explained. She won't mind you using it until we can prepare something more permanent. Permanent. The word echoed in Lila's mind. How long did Adam Ransom expect her to stay, and what would happen when his sister arrived? Would she be evaluated, tested, perhaps deemed too unstable after all? Rest now, Mrs. Hollister said, placing Lila's small valise on a bench at the foot of the bed. No one will disturb you until you're ready to come down. Left alone, Lila opened her valise packed by neighbors, she presumed, as she hadn't been allowed to gather her own things before being taken to the station. Inside were a few simple dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, a hairbrush, and a small framed photograph she thought had been lost in the fire, her family, taken last Christmas, all of them smiling into the camera, unaware of the tragedy that awaited them. She traced their faces with trembling fingers. Her father, stern but kind-eyed, her mother, elegant and warm. Her brother Tommy, just 12, with a mischievous grin that had always gotten him into trouble. I'm sorry, she whispered to them. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you. The tears came then, and she didn't try to stop them. She curled up on the bed, clutching the photograph to her chest, and wept until exhaustion claimed her once more. When Lila awoke, the angle of sunlight through the windows told her it was late afternoon. For a disorienting moment, she didn't recognize her surroundings, panic rising in her throat until memory returned the train station. Adam Ransom's intervention, the Broken Arrow Ranch. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Hollister's entrance. The housekeeper carried a stack of folded towels and a clean dress that looked to be about Lila's size. Thought you might like that bath now, she said. The water's heating, should be ready in about 15 minutes, and I found this dress in the attic belonged to Mr. Ransom's mother. Looks to be your size, more or less. That's very kind, thank you, Lila said, sitting up and smoothing her rumpled clothes. Mrs. Hollister set the items on the dresser. Mr. Ransom's returned from the pastures. He's asked if you join him for dinner at 6 if you're feeling up to it. Lila nodded, though the prospect of conversation filled her with trepidation. What would they talk about? What expectations would he have? What rules would be set for her stay? The bath, when it was ready, proved to be a luxury Lila hadn't realized how desperately she needed. The large copper tub had been set up in a small bathing room at the end of the hall, filled with steaming water scented lightly with lavender. Mrs. Hollister had left soap, a washing cloth, and a small jar of hair rinse beside the tub, along with strict instructions to take her time. Sinking into the warm water, Lila felt months of tension begin to melt away. She hadn't had a proper bath since before the fire, only hasty washes from a basin in the small rented room she'd taken after losing her home. She scrubbed her skin until it glowed pink, washed her hair twice, and lingered until the water began to cool. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a soft towel, she felt almost human again. The dress Mrs. Hollister had provided was a simple blue cotton, modestly cut but well made. It fit surprisingly well, though it was slightly loose around the waist, evidence of how much weight she'd lost during her months of grief. She brushed her hair until it shone, twisting it into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Looking in the small mirror above the dresser, she barely recognized herself. The shadows under her eyes remained, and her cheeks were still too hollow, but the haunted wildness that had frightened the townsfolk was less evident. At precisely 6 o'clock, she made her way downstairs, following the sound of voices to a formal dining room at the front of the house. Adam Ransom stood when she entered, his expression warming with approval at her transformed appearance. "Miss Thompson," he said, "you look much restored." "I hope your room is comfortable." "Very much so," she replied, taking the seat he pulled out for her. "Thank you again for your kindness, both of you," she added, nodding to Mrs. Hollister, who was placing a roast on the table. "Nonsense," the housekeeper said, but her eyes crinkled with pleasure at the gratitude. "Now eat up, both of you. Growing ranch doesn't run on empty stomachs." The meal was delicious roast beef with potatoes, carrots, and fresh bread, followed by apple pie still warm from the oven. Lila ate sparingly at first, then with more enthusiasm as her stomach remembered what it was to be properly filled. Conversation flowed more easily than she'd feared. Adam asked thoughtful questions about her interests and education, carefully avoiding any mention of her family or recent troubles. She learned he'd taken over the ranch when his father died 5 years ago, expanding it from primarily cattle to include horses as well. His sister Sarah had trained as a nurse during the war, serving in field hospitals before settling in Austin. "She has a way with difficult cases," Adam explained. "People others have given up on. She'll be a good friend to you, I think." The implication that she was a difficult case stung, but Lila couldn't deny the truth of it. "And what will be expected of me while I'm here?" she asked directly. "Surely there's something I can do to earn my keep." Adam considered her question seriously. "For now, nothing but regaining your strength. Later, if you wish, Mrs. Hollister could use help with household accounts. She's a fine housekeeper but admits numbers aren't her strong suit." "My father was a banker," Lila offered. "He taught me bookkeeping from the time I was 14. "Then your skills will be welcome when you're ready," Adam nodded. "But there's no hurry, Miss Thompson. Your only obligation is to give yourself time to heal." After dinner, Adam suggested a short walk to help with digestion. The evening air was cool but pleasant as they strolled around the main house, the setting sun painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink. "It's so peaceful here," Lila observed, breathing deeply of the sage-scented air. "That's why I thought it might help you," Adam replied. "Town's too close, too many memories, too many people watching and judging. Out here you can just be." They stopped at a wooden bench beneath a large oak tree, its branches creating a canopy overhead. Sitting side by side, they watched as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Mr. Ransom," Lila began hesitantly, "may I ask you something personal?" He nodded, his profile strong against the twilight. "You may. You mentioned your brother found his peace. What did you mean by that?" The moment the question left her lips, she regretted its intrusiveness. "I'm sorry, that's too forward, no," he interrupted gently. "It's a fair question given that I've involved myself in your situation." He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Matthew struggled for nearly 2 years after coming home from the war, nightmares like yours. Moments where he'd be back on the battlefield in his mind, drinking to numb it all." Adam's voice grew softer. "One night during a thunderstorm, the sounds triggered something in him. He rode out, distraught. We found his horse the next morning, but it took 3 days to find him." His hands tightened slightly on his knees. "He'd shot himself by the creek where we used to fish as boys." "I'm so sorry," Lila whispered, instinctively reaching out to touch his arm. "The town called it madness, said the war had broken his mind, but I knew better." Matt wasn't crazy, he was in pain, a pain so deep he couldn't see any way through it. Adam turned to face her, his eyes intense in the gathering darkness. "That's why I couldn't stand by and watch them take you away. I recognized that same pain in you." Lila felt tears gathering, but for once they weren't solely from grief. "Thank you for seeing that difference," she said quietly. "Everyone else just saw a broken woman and embarrassment. People fear what they don't understand," Adam replied, "and real grief makes them uncomfortable. Reminds them of their own vulnerability." They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, watching as more stars appeared in the vast Texas sky. Finally, Adam stood and offered his hand. "It's getting dark. We should head back." As they walked toward the house, now glowing with lamplight from within, Lila felt a curious sensation unfurling in her chest, not happiness exactly, but perhaps its distant cousin. For the first time since the fire, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope that someday, Somehow, she might find her way back to herself. That night, the nightmares came as they always did, flames devouring her childhood home, her family's screams, her own desperate attempts to reach them through the inferno. But this time, when she woke gasping and disoriented, the unfamiliar room didn't increase her panic. Instead, the soft blue walls and gentle moonlight streaming through the curtains gradually grounded her. She was at the Broken Arrow Ranch. She was safe. And tomorrow would be a new day. The next week fell into a rhythm that surprised Lila with its comforting predictability. She rose early, taking breakfast with Adam before he headed out to work the ranch. Mornings were spent helping Mrs. Hollister with light household tasks, nothing taxing, just enough to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. After lunch, she often read from Adam's surprisingly extensive library or took short walks around the immediate grounds, gradually venturing a bit farther each day as her strength returned. The nightmares continued, but their grip seemed less vicious. When she woke crying out, Mrs. Hollister would appear with a cup of chamomile tea and sit with her until she calmed. No judgments, no fearful glances, just quiet companionship until the terror subsided. On her 5th day at the ranch, Adam invited her to accompany him to the stables after breakfast. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," he said, a hint of mystery in his voice. The stables were immaculate, the smell of hay and leather oddly comforting as they walked past stalls housing magnificent horses. Adam led her to the far end, where a beautiful chestnut mare watched them with intelligent eyes. "This is Penny," Adam said, stroking the horse's nose affectionately. "She's gentle as they come, but spirited when she needs to be." The mare nickered softly, extending her head toward Lila in greeting. "She's beautiful," Lila murmured, tentatively reaching out to touch the horse's velvety muzzle. "She's yours if you want her," Adam said simply. Lila's hand froze mid-stroke. "What?" "Every lady should have a horse," he explained, "and Penny needs a rider. I thought perhaps when you're stronger, you might enjoy exploring the ranch." Emotion welled in Lila's throat. Such a thoughtful gesture, assuming she would be there long enough to form a bond with this magnificent creature. Assuming she had a future beyond grief. "I don't know what to say," she managed finally. "Say you'll try," he suggested. "Not today, perhaps, but soon. Riding can be freeing." The way he said it made her wonder if he'd found his own solace on horseback after his brother's death. "I'd like that," she agreed softly. Adam's smile was warm. "Good. Now I've got work to do, but Miguel, he's our stable master, can show you how to properly greet your new friend." As Adam walked away, Lila turned back to the mare, who was regarding her with what seemed like gentle curiosity. "Hello, Penny," she whispered. "I'm Lila. I suppose we're both starting something new." The horse nickered again, nudging Lila's hand with her nose as if in agreement. The promised arrival of Adam's sister came on Lila's 8th day at the ranch. Sarah Ransom turned out to be as imposing as her brother, in her own way tall for a woman, with the same piercing blue eyes as Adam, but with a directness of manner that spoke of her nursing background. She assessed Lila with a professional gaze the moment they were introduced, but there was kindness beneath the scrutiny. "So you're the one who's put my brother's protective instincts into overdrive," Sarah said, clasping Lila's hand firmly. "Good. He needs someone to fuss over besides his cattle." "Sarah," Adam warned, but there was affection in his tone. Sarah waved him off. "Oh, hush. Miss Thompson and I are going to be friends, and friends don't stand on ceremony." She linked her arm through Lila's. "Now, show me to my room so I can freshen up, then you and I can get properly acquainted." True to her word, after settling in, Sarah sought out Lila in the garden where she'd been helping Mrs. Hollister pick herbs. The nurse brought a tray with tea and Mrs. Hollister's fresh baked cookies, setting it on a small table under the shade of an elm tree. "Mrs. Hollister tells me you've been sleeping poorly," Sarah said without preamble as she poured the tea. "Nightmares, I imagine." Lila tensed slightly. "Yes. I expected as much. I've seen similar symptoms in soldiers who have witnessed terrible things." Sarah handed her a cup. "Tell me about them, the nightmares, not the soldiers." There was something in Sarah's no-nonsense approach that made it easier to talk about the horrors that visited Lila in sleep. She found herself describing the recurring dreams in detail she'd never shared with anyone, the heat of the flames, the suffocating smoke, the desperate cries of her family that she couldn't reach. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression compassionate but analytical. When Lila finished, the nurse nodded thoughtfully. "You survived something no one should have to endure," she said simply. "Your mind is trying to make sense of it, trying to find a way to rewrite the ending. That's not madness, it's your spirit fighting to heal." "The town doctor said it was female hysteria," Lila said bitterly. "That my feminine constitution was too weak to handle the trauma." Sarah snorted inelegantly. "Dr. Wilcox, I presume that man wouldn't know genuine medical science if it danced naked before him wearing a sign." She leaned forward intently. "Listen to me, Lila. What you're experiencing is grief, profound, life-altering grief. It will change you, yes, but it doesn't have to destroy you." "How do I stop the nightmares?" Lila asked, hating the pleading note in her voice. "You don't, not entirely, not yet." Sarah's honesty was refreshing, if difficult to hear. "But we can try to make them less frequent, less intense. I have some techniques that might help: breathing exercises, herbal preparations that promote dreamless sleep." "No laudanum," Lila said quickly. "They tried that in town. It made everything worse." "Absolutely not," Sarah agreed firmly. "Dulling your senses only postpones the healing. No, what you need is to process your grief, not bury it." Over the following days, Sarah became Lila's steady companion, teaching her breathing techniques to use when panic struck, preparing special tea blends for the evenings, and most importantly, listening without judgment when Lila needed to speak of her family. "Tell me about them," she would say, "not how they died, but how they lived." Gradually, Lila found herself able to recall happy memories without immediately being overwhelmed by the tragedy of their end. She told Sarah about her father's terrible jokes that made everyone groan, her mother's talent for coaxing flowers to bloom where nothing should grow, her brother's collection of interesting rocks that he kept in labeled boxes under his bed. "They sound wonderful," Sarah said one afternoon as they sat shelling peas on the porch. "No wonder you miss them so deeply." "I do," Lila agreed, surprised to find she could smile through the tears now, "but it helps to talk about them, makes them feel not so far away." Sarah nodded in understanding. That's how healing begins, not by forgetting, but by remembering the love instead of just the loss. As Sarah's presence helped calm Lila's inner turmoil, Adam's gentle encouragement was rebuilding her physical strength. True to his word, once she felt ready, he began teaching her to ride Penny, starting with basic skills in the corral before gradually venturing onto the trails that wound through the ranch property. There was a freedom in riding that Lila had never experienced before. The rhythm of hoofbeats against earth, the wind in her hair, the vastness of the Texas landscape spreading before her, it all combined to create moments when grief couldn't touch her, when she existed purely in the present. Adam was a patient teacher, never pushing beyond what she was ready for, but always encouraging her to try a little more each time. He seemed to understand instinctively when she needed quiet companionship and when she needed distraction. One warm afternoon, about 3 weeks into her stay, they rode to a small lake on the western edge of the property. Dismounting, they led their horses to the water's edge to drink, then settled on a grassy bank beneath the shade of several willows. "My father used to bring us fishing here," Adam said, skipping a stone across the water's surface. "Called it his thinking spot." "It's lovely," Lila replied, watching the ripples spread from where the stone had disturbed the lake's serenity. "Peaceful. I thought you might appreciate that." Adam glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "You seem lighter these days." Lila considered his observation. "I feel not whole exactly, but less shattered." She pulled a blade of grass, twisting it between her fingers. "Sarah says grief is like a wound, it needs air to heal properly, not bandages that smother it." "My sister always did have a way with words," Adam said with a small smile. "She's right, though." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by birdsong and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the lake's surface. Lila found herself studying Adam's profile as he gazed across the water, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny crinkles at the corners of his eyes that hinted at a man who smiled easily in happier times. "Tell me about your parents," she said suddenly. You've heard so much about mine, but you rarely speak of yours." Adam seemed surprised by the request but not displeased. "My father was a force of nature, stubborn as a mule, worked from sunup to sundown, expected the same from everyone else. But he'd give you the shirt off his back if you needed it." His expression softened with memory. "My mother was his opposite, in many ways gentle, patient, loved books and music. She taught piano to half the children in the county." "You have her eyes," Lila observed. He glanced at her, startled. "That's what my father always said. They sound like wonderful people. They were." He tossed another stone into the lake. "Would have liked you, I think, especially my mother. She always said the ranch needed a woman's touch." The comment hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities neither was ready to acknowledge. Adam cleared his throat and stood, offering Lila his hand. "We should head back. Mrs. Hollister will have dinner waiting and she gets cross if we're late." As they rode back toward the ranch house, side by side in companionable silence, Lila realized that somewhere in these quiet days at Broken Arrow, Adam Ransom had become more than just her rescuer. He had become her friend, perhaps the truest friend she'd ever known. And if her heart quickened when their hands accidentally touched, or if she found herself watching him when he wasn't aware, well, that was a complication she wasn't ready to examine too closely. As spring melded into early summer, life at the Broken Arrow fell into a rhythm that brought Lila increasing comfort. The nightmares still came, but less frequently, and with Sarah's techniques, she could often calm herself without waking the household. During the day, she divided her time between helping Mrs. Hollister with household affairs, riding with Adam when his work allowed, and long conversations with Sarah about everything and nothing. One afternoon, nearly 2 months after her arrival, Adam approached her as she sat on the porch with her mending. "I need to ride into Dallas tomorrow for supplies," he said, leaning against the porch railing. "I thought you might want to come along." Lila's hands stilled, needle poised mid-stitch. The thought of returning to town, of facing the people who had been so quick to label her insane, sent a wave of anxiety through her. "I don't think I'm ready," she admitted, hating the tremor in her voice. Adam nodded, unsurprised. "I understand. But someday you'll need to face it again, on your own terms." He studied her face carefully. "You're stronger than you know, Lila." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her pulse quicken. "Perhaps next time," she offered. "I'll hold you to that," he said with a small smile before heading toward the barn. Lila watched him go, conflicted emotions swirling within her. The prospect of returning to Dallas terrified her, yet she knew he was right. She couldn't hide at Broken Arrow forever. That evening at dinner, Sarah announced her intention to return to Austin the following week. "You don't need me hovering over you anymore," she told Lila with a warm smile. "You're doing remarkably well. But what if the nightmares return full force?" Lila asked, surprising herself with the panic in her voice. "What if I start hearing them again, or you have the tools to manage now?" Sarah reassured her. "And Adam will be here. Besides, I'm only in Austin, not on the moon. I can return if needed." Lila glanced at Adam, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. "Of course," she said finally. "You have your own life to return to. I've imposed on your kindness long enough." "Nonsense," Sarah replied briskly. "You've been a breath of fresh air for this dusty old place." "Heaven knows my brother needed the company." Adam cleared his throat. "If you two are finished discussing me as if I weren't present, perhaps we could enjoy Mrs. Hollister's peach cobbler before it gets cold." Sarah rolled her eyes at her brother's discomfort, but obliged, changing the subject to the upcoming county fair. Yet as the conversation flowed around her, Lila couldn't help wondering what Sarah's departure would mean for her position at Broken Arrow. Without the nurse's presence as chaperone, would it be proper for her to remain? What would people say? Her worries must have shown on her face, for after dinner, Adam asked her to join him on the porch. "You're concerned about Sarah leaving," he said without preamble, his directness one of the qualities she'd come to appreciate most about him. "It wouldn't be proper for me to stay without her," Lila replied, voicing the thought that had been troubling her. "People would talk." "People always talk," Adam said dismissively, But if it concerns you, Mrs. Hollister is a more than adequate chaperone. She's been like family since before I was born." "It's not just that," Lila admitted. "I don't want to be a burden." "You've done so much already, and you're not a burden, Lila," he interrupted gently. "You never were." The sincerity in his voice made her look up, meeting his gaze directly for perhaps the first time since her arrival. What she saw there made her breath catch warmth, respect, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Besides, who would help Mrs. Hollister with the accounts? She was positively giddy when you reorganized the pantry inventory system." The tension broke as Lila laughed, remembering the housekeeper's surprised delight at the efficient new system Lila had implemented. "She did seem pleased. Pleased, I thought she might adopt you on the spot." Adam's expression grew more serious. "My point is, you've made a place for yourself here. You belong at Broken Arrow for as long as you wish to stay." Belong, such a simple word, yet it resonated through Lila with unexpected force. Since the fire, she'd felt adrift, disconnected from everything and everyone. The idea that she might belong somewhere again, that she might have found a new place in the world, was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Thank you," she said again, the words wholly inadequate for the emotions behind them. Adam simply nodded, seeming to understand all she couldn't express. The next day, while Adam was in town, Lila found herself restless. She'd completed her usual tasks by mid-morning and couldn't settle to reading or needlework. Finally, on impulse, she decided to ride out to the lake alone for the first time. Mrs. Hollister raised her eyebrows when Lila mentioned her plan but didn't object. "Take water and a snack," she advised. "And be back before sundown." Penny seemed to sense Lila's excitement, prancing a bit as they set out from the stables. The day was gloriously clear, the June sun warm but not yet oppressive, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and sage. As they followed the now familiar trail, Lila felt a surprising sense of confidence. 2 months ago, she could barely care for herself. Now she was riding across open country alone, guiding her horse with firm but gentle hands, aware of her surroundings in a way she'd never been before living at Broken Arrow. The lake was even more beautiful in solitude. Lila dismounted, securing Penny where she could graze, then settled on the bank with the small lunch Mrs. Hollister had packed. As she ate, she watched a family of ducks glide across the water's surface, their movements creating rippling patterns that mesmerized her. She wasn't sure how long she'd been sitting there when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Turning, she saw Adam riding toward her, relief evident in his posture even at a distance. "There you are," he called, dismounting and leading his horse to join Penny. "Mrs. Hollister said you'd ridden out alone." "I hope that's all right," Lila replied, suddenly concerned she'd overstepped. "I was careful and I know the way now." "It's more than all right," he assured her, settling on the grass beside her. "It's wonderful to see you confident enough to venture out on your own." He studied her face. "You look at peace." "I feel it, oddly enough," she admitted. "I never thought I would again after." She didn't need to finish the sentence. "But sitting here watching those ducks, I realized I was thinking about my family and smiling, not crying." Adam's eyes warmed. "That's a gift, remembering with joy instead of only pain." "It is," she agreed softly, "one I never expected to receive." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the ducks together. Finally, Adam spoke again, his tone deliberately casual. "I saw Dr. Wilcox in town today." Lila tensed. "Oh," he asked after you in that condescending way of his. A hint of anger crept into Adam's voice. "Wanted to know if your condition had worsened, if we'd reconsidered institutional care." "And what did you tell him?" Lila asked, her heart pounding. Adam's jaw tightened. "I told him you were flourishing, that your so-called condition had been nothing more than natural grief, compounded by the town's failure to show basic human compassion." "I imagine that went over well," Lila said with a wry smile, picturing the doctor's offended expression. "About as well as you'd expect." Adam plucked a blade of grass, twirling it between his fingers. "He implied that you've bewitched me somehow, that I'm under your spell." The way he said it, with a curious blend of amusement and something deeper, made Lila's cheeks warm. "And are you?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Adam turned to her then, his blue eyes intent. "I think perhaps I am," he said quietly, though not in the way the good doctor meant. The air between them seemed to still, charged with unspoken possibilities. Lila's heart raced as Adam's gaze dropped briefly to her lips before meeting her eyes again. "Lila." Whatever he'd been about to say was interrupted by a distant rumble of thunder. They both looked up to see dark clouds gathering on the horizon, moving swiftly in their direction. "We should head back," Adam said, rising quickly and offering her his hand. "That storm's coming fast." The ride back to the ranch was hurried, the horses sensing the approaching storm and eager to reach shelter. They made it to the stables just as the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly helping Miguel settle the horses before running to the house as the skies opened in earnest. By the time they reached the porch, they were both soaked, laughing as they shook water from their clothes. "Perfect timing," Adam said, pushing wet hair from his forehead. "Any later and we'd have been drenched to the skin." "We're not far from that as it is," Lila replied, wringing water from her skirts. Mrs. Hollister appeared at the door, clucking in disapproval. "Look at you two, dripping all over my clean porch. Inside, both of you, before you catch your deaths." As they followed the housekeeper inside, Lila was acutely aware of the moment that had been interrupted at the lake. Had Adam been about to declare feelings for her? And if so, how did she feel about that possibility? The question lingered in her mind as she changed into dry clothes, combed out her damp hair, and tried to make sense of the emotions swirling within her. Grief still occupied a large space in her heart, but it was no longer the only resident. Somehow, without her noticing, Adam Ransom had claimed a portion for himself. The storm raged through dinner, conversation punctuated by crashes of thunder that made the windows rattle. Sarah, observing the heightened awareness between her brother and Lila, raised an eyebrow knowingly but said nothing. When the meal was finished, Lila excused herself early, claiming fatigue from her ride. In truth, she needed time alone to sort through her confused emotions. Was she ready for whatever might be developing between them? Was it fair to Adam when she was still healing? Sleep eluded her as the storm continued, lightning illuminating her room in brief, brilliant flashes. Around midnight, a particularly violent thunderclap shook the house, and suddenly she wasn't in her bed at Broken Arrow anymore. She was back in the burning house, smoke filling her lungs, the roar of flames in her ears. She woke with a strangled cry, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding so hard she feared it might burst from her chest. For several terrifying moments, she couldn't remember where she was, panic clawing at her throat as the storm raged outside her window. Then her door opened and Adam was there, concern etched on his features. "Lila, I heard you cry out." His presence anchored her to reality, pulling her back from the brink of terror. "The thunder," she managed, her voice shaking. "It sounded like the house collapsing." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He crossed to her bed, sitting carefully on its edge. "You're safe," he said gently. "You're at Broken Arrow. The fire was months ago. You survived." "I know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "In my mind, I know, but my heart forgets sometimes." Without hesitation, Adam reached for her hands, holding them firmly in his own. "Then I'll remind it," he said simply, "as often as you need." Something broke open inside Lila at his words, not the brittle, painful shattering she'd experienced so many times since the fire, but a gentle unfolding, like a flower turning toward the sun after a long winter. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his shoulder, and felt his arms come around her, strong and steadying. They stayed that way until her breathing calmed and the worst of the storm passed. When Adam finally pulled away, his expression was tender but resolute. "Try to sleep now," he said softly. "I'll be just down the hall if you need me." As he rose to leave, Lila caught his hand. "Adam," she said, his name still new on her lips. "Thank you, not just for tonight, but for everything, for seeing me when no one else did." He turned back, and in the dim light from the hallway, she could see the depth of emotion in his eyes. "How could I not?" he asked simply. "You shine too brightly to ignore, even in your darkest moments." With that, he was gone, closing her door quietly behind him. Lila settled back against her pillows. the panic of the nightmare replaced by a curious warmth that spread through her chest. Outside, the storm was passing, the thunder now a distant rumble, the rain a gentle patter against her window. For the first time in months, she felt not just at peace, but hopeful that perhaps there might be joy in her future after all, joy she never thought she'd feel again. The morning after the storm dawned clear and fresh, the world washed clean by the night's deluge. Lila rose early, feeling surprisingly rested despite the midnight interruption. As she dressed, she considered the moment shared with Adam, the comfort of his presence, the warmth of his words, the sense that something significant had shifted between them. At breakfast, Sarah watched the two of them with knowing eyes as they exchanged shy glances over coffee and Mrs. Hollister's fresh biscuits. "I've decided to delay my departure for another week," Sarah announced casually. "The roads will be muddy after the storm, and I'd like to see how Mrs. Jameson's new baby is faring before I leave." Adam raised an eyebrow at his sister. "How considerate of you." "Isn't it, though?" Sarah replied with a sweet smile that didn't fool anyone at the table later that morning as Lila helped Mrs. Hollister hang freshly washed linens on the line. The housekeeper broached the subject that had clearly been on her mind. "Mr. Ransom seems quite taken with you," she observed, smoothing a pillowcase before pinning it to the line. Lila felt her cheeks warm. "He's been very kind." "HMPH, Mrs. Hollister snorted. "That boy's been kind to plenty of folks in need, but I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." She fixed Lila with a penetrating stare. "Question is, how do you feel about him?" The directness of the question caught Lila off guard. I care for him deeply," she admitted, "but everything is so complicated. My grief, my recovery, the circumstances of my coming here." "Life is always complicated, child," Mrs. Hollister said gently. "Doesn't mean you stop living it." She handed Lila another sheet to hang. "That man saved you from a terrible fate, yes, but these past months you've saved him too in a different way." "What do you mean?" The housekeeper's weathered face softened with affection. "Since his brother died, Adam's been existing, not living. Running the ranch, doing his duty, but the joy was gone from him." She nodded toward the distant figure of Adam working with a horse in the corral. "Look at him now. He smiles again, he laughs. That's your doing." Lila watched as Adam guided the young horse through its paces, his movements confident but gentle, his expression peaceful. Something swelled in her chest at the sight, a feeling too new and fragile to name but undeniably powerful. "I don't want to be a burden to him," she whispered. "Or a responsibility," Mrs. Hollister chuckled. "Oh, child, you stopped being either of those things weeks ago. Now you're just the woman he's falling in love with." The words hung in the air between them, both terrifying and exhilarating. Lila turned back to the laundry, but her mind was elsewhere, contemplating possibilities she'd thought forever closed to her after the fire. That afternoon, Adam found her in the garden, kneeling among the herbs she'd helped Mrs. Hollister plant. He looked uncharacteristically nervous as he approached, his hat in his hands. "I was wondering if you might like to ride out to the North Ridge with me," he said. "There's something I'd like to show you." Curious, Lila agreed, and soon they were riding side by side through lush pastureland still glistening from the previous night's rain. Adam was quieter than usual, occasionally glancing at her as if on the verge of speaking, then thinking better of it. After about an hour's ride, they crested a hill, and Lila gasped at the view that spread before them. The North Ridge overlooked a vast valley, carpeted in wildflowers of every hue: bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, Mexican hat, and dozens of others she couldn't name, stretching as far as the eye could see. "It's beautiful," she breathed, dismounting to better appreciate the sight. "My mother called it God's painting," Adam said, joining her at the ridge's edge. "The flowers only bloom like this for a few weeks each year after the spring rains." They stood in companionable silence, drinking in the spectacular vista. Finally, Adam turned to her, his expression suddenly serious. "Lila, there's something I need to say, and I'd appreciate it if you'd let me finish before responding." Heart fluttering, she nodded. "When I first saw you at that train station, bound for the asylum, something in me couldn't bear it. I told myself it was because of Matthew, because I'd seen what happens when pain is mistaken for madness." He took a deep breath. But it was more than that. Even then, something in me recognized something in you, a kindred spirit, perhaps. He moved a step closer. These past months, watching you fight your way back from the darkest grief, seeing your courage and determination, I've come to admire you more than anyone I've ever known. Lila's breath caught as he reached for her hands, holding them gently between his own. I know your heart is still healing, he continued softly. I know the pain of losing your family will always be with you, and I would never presume to rush you or push you toward feelings you're not ready for. His blue eyes searched hers, filled with an emotion that made her heart race. But I need you to know that I've fallen in love with you, Lila Thompson. Deeply, completely in love. And whether you ever feel the same or not, I want you to know that you'll always have a home at Broken Arrow for as long as you wish it. Tears filled Lila's eyes, but unlike the tears she'd shed for months, these were born of a different emotion entirely. Adam, she whispered, squeezing his hands, you saved my life that day at the station, not just from the asylum, but from drowning in my own grief. She took a shaky breath. I thought that part of me died in the fire, the part that could love, that could hope for a future. But you've shown me that it's still there, buried beneath the ashes. A tear slipped down her cheek, and Adam reached up to brush it away, his touch infinitely tender. I don't know what the future holds, Lila continued, but I know that I care for you in a way I never expected to care for anyone again, and if you're willing to be patient with me as I continue to heal. I would wait forever, Adam said simply. The sincerity in his voice undid her. Lila stepped closer, resting her forehead against his chest, and felt his arms come around her, strong and sure. They stood that way for a long moment, the vast expanse of wildflowers stretching before them, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders. When Lila finally looked up, Adam's gaze was tender. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it brought fresh tears to her eyes. It was a promise, a beginning, a whispered hope for healing and joy yet to come. As they rode back to the ranch, side by side in the golden light of late afternoon, Lila felt a sense of peace settle over her. The grief was still there, a part of her now and forever, but it no longer defined her entirely. There was room in her heart for new feelings, new bonds, new dreams. She glanced at Adam, who smiled at her with such tenderness it made her breath catch. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Sarah's departure the following week was bittersweet. As the women embraced on the porch, the nurse whispered in Lila's ear, "Take care of my brother. And remember what I told you, healing isn't a straight line. There will still be difficult days." "I know," Lila replied, "but now I have hope to carry me through them." Sarah pulled back, studying Lila's face with professional satisfaction. "That, Miss Thompson, is the best medicine of all." As summer deepened into fall, life at Broken Arrow settled into a new rhythm. Adam and Lila spent as much time together as his responsibilities allowed, riding the property, picnicking by the lake, or simply sitting on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. They took their courtship slowly, both understanding the need for patience. There were still nights when Lila woke in terror, days when grief overwhelmed her without warning, but Adam was always there, steady as bedrock, offering comfort without pressure, understanding without judgment. In October, Adam suggested they ride into Dallas for the Harvest Festival. Lila hesitated. She hadn't returned to town since the day he'd rescued her from the train platform. "We don't have to," he assured her, "but I thought perhaps facing it together might help lay some ghosts to rest." She considered his words, recognizing the wisdom in them. "All right," she agreed finally, "but promise you won't leave my side." "Not for a moment," he vowed. The day of the festival dawned clear and cool, perfect autumn weather. Lila dressed with particular care in a new dress Mrs. Hollister had helped her make, deep blue with lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but elegant. As she pinned up her hair, she barely recognized the woman in the mirror, cheeks flushed with healthy color, eyes clear and bright, a quiet confidence in her posture that had been missing for so long. Adam's expression when she descended the stairs told her everything she needed to know. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. The ride to Dallas was pleasant, the countryside ablaze with autumn colors. As they approached the outskirts of town, Lila felt her anxiety rising, but Adam's steady presence beside her kept panic at bay. The town square was decorated with corn shocks, pumpkins, and colorful bunting. Children darted between stalls selling everything from fresh apple cider to handcrafted toys. Musicians played on a small stage at the center, while couples danced on a wooden platform nearby. As they tied their horses at the hitching post, Lila was acutely aware of curious glances cast their way. Word of their arrival spread quickly, and soon people were openly staring, whispering behind their hands. Adam's arm tightened protectively around her waist. "We can leave if you want," he murmured. Lila took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "No, I need to do this." They walked through the festival together, stopping at various stalls, exchanging pleasantries with those brave enough to approach them. Some people were genuinely warm, expressing happiness at seeing Lila looking so well. Others were coolly polite, their judgment evident in tight smiles and quick glances. Dr. Wilcox pointedly turned his back when they passed him, but Sheriff Daniels actually tipped his hat, his expression unreadable. "You're handling this admirably," Adam said as they paused to watch the dancing. "It's easier with you beside me," Lila replied honestly. "Though I admit some of their stares make me feel like a curiosity in a traveling show. People fear what they don't understand," Adam reminded her, echoing his words from months before. "Their opinions matter far less than you might think." As the afternoon wore on, Lila gradually relaxed, even finding moments of genuine enjoyment in the festivities. They were sampling fresh baked bread at Mrs. Peterson's stall when a small voice called out behind them. "Miss Thompson, is that really you?" Turning, Lila found young Emily Collins, daughter of the town's dressmaker, staring up at her with wide eyes. The girl had been one of Tommy's schoolmates, often joining the Thompson family for Sunday dinners. "Hello, Emily," Lila said warmly, kneeling to the child's level. "Yes, it's really me." Emily's face lit up. "Mama said you went away because you were sick. Are you better now?" The simple question, asked with a child's innocent directness, might have devastated Lila months ago. Now she found herself smiling gently. "I was very sad for a long time," she explained. "But yes, I'm better now." Emily nodded seriously. "I was sad too when Tommy died. He was my friend, but Mama says he's in heaven with your Mama and Papa and they're watching over us." Tears pricked at Lila's eyes, but they were healing tears, not the devastating torrent of before. "I believe that too," she said softly. Emily glanced up at Adam, who was watching the exchange with gentle attentiveness. "Is this your beau?" she asked with childish frankness. Lila felt her cheeks warm as she stood. "This is Mr. Ransom. He's been very kind to me. Are you going to marry him?" Emily persisted, ignoring her mother's mortified "Emily" from a few feet away. Before Lila could formulate a response, Adam knelt to Emily's level, his expression serious but kind. "I certainly hope so, Miss Emily, when the time is right. But that's a question I haven't formally asked Miss Thompson yet, so perhaps we should keep it between us for now." Emily grinned, delighted to be included in such an important secret. "I won't tell anyone," she promised solemnly, before skipping back to her scandalized mother. As they moved on, Lila glanced at Adam, her heart pounding. "You didn't have to humor her," she said quietly. He stopped, turning to face her fully, uncaring of the curious onlookers around them. "I wasn't humoring her," he said simply. "I meant every word." Something shifted between them in that moment, a deepening, a certainty that hadn't been there before. Lila saw her future reflected in his eyes, and for the first time since the fire, she reached for it without hesitation or fear. When they returned to Broken Arrow that evening, Adam asked Lila to walk with him in the garden, now ablaze with autumn flowers. As the sun set in a spectacular display of orange and gold, he turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "I had a whole speech prepared," he admitted with a rueful smile, "but after today, words seem inadequate." "Then speak from your heart," Lila encouraged softly. Adam's eyes were steady on hers, filled with a love so pure it took her breath away. "Lila Thompson, I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. You've brought light back into my life when I didn't even realize how dark it had become." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. I know we've only known each other for months, not years. I know there's still healing ahead for both of us. But I don't want to spend another day wondering if someday you might be my wife." Opening the box, he revealed a delicate gold ring set with a single perfect pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "This was my mother's," he explained. "She made me promise to give it only to a woman worthy of becoming the heart of Broken Arrow." Kneeling before her, Adam looked up, vulnerability and hope mingled in his expression. "Lila Thompson, will you marry me? Will you build a new life with me, here at Broken Arrow?" Tears blurred Lila's vision as she gazed down at this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "Yes," she whispered, her voice catching on the simple word. "Yes, Adam Ransom, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms, Lila felt the final pieces of her shattered heart knitting together. Not as they had been before, she would forever carry the scars of her loss, but whole in a new way, stronger perhaps for having been broken and mended. Their wedding took place the following spring, when the wildflowers carpeted the valley below the North Ridge in a riot of color. They chose to hold the ceremony outdoors, beneath the sprawling oak tree where they had shared so many conversations. Sarah returned from Austin to stand with her brother, while Emily Collins, to her immense delight, served as Lila's flower girl. Mrs. Hollister outdid herself preparing a feast that would be talked about for years to come, and ranch hands constructed long tables and benches to accommodate the surprisingly large number of guests. For many in Dallas had reconsidered their judgment of Lila Thompson in the months since the Harvest Festival. Seeing her transformation from a woman consumed by grief to one radiating quiet joy had softened even the hardest hearts. All except Dr. Will Cox, who declined his invitation with a terse note about professional disagreements. As Lila prepared in Sarah's old room, now permanently hers, Mrs. Hollister helped arrange her veil, her mother's, salvaged from the fire and carefully restored. "Your parents would be proud," the housekeeper said, uncharacteristic emotion making her voice husky. "They'd want this happiness for you." "I know," Lila replied softly. "I feel them with me today." When she walked toward Adam, a vision in ivory silk with wildflowers in her hair, the look on his face was one she would treasure forever: wonder, joy, and a love so profound it seemed to illuminate him from within. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to cherish each other through whatever life might bring, to honor the past while building a future together, to be each other's strength in times of weakness, each other's light in times of darkness. As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Adam's lips met hers in their first kiss as a married couple, Lila felt a sense of completion she had thought forever lost to her. The fire had taken so much, but it hadn't taken everything. She had survived, she had healed. And now, incredibly, she had found love again. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing beneath lanterns strung from the oak's branches. As twilight deepened into night, Adam led Lila away from the festivities, toward a path she hadn't taken before. "Where are we going?" she asked, curious. "To your wedding gift," he replied mysteriously. The path wound through a grove of trees before opening onto a small clearing. There, bathed in moonlight, stood a newly built cottage, small but exquisitely crafted, with a wide porch and windows that would catch both sunrise and sunset. "I thought you might want a place that's truly ours," Adam explained as Lila gazed in wonder at the structure. "The main house will always be our home, but this could be our retreat when we need solitude." Touched beyond words, Lila turned to embrace her husband. "It's perfect," she whispered against his shoulder. "Absolutely perfect." Later that night, as they lay together in the new cottage, the moonlight streaming through the windows, Adam traced the curve of Lila's cheek with gentle fingers. "Happy?" he asked softly. Lila considered the question seriously. "Happy doesn't seem adequate," she replied. "Grateful, blessed." "Whole," she looked up at him, love shining in her eyes. "You saw me when no one else did, Adam, not just my pain but the person beneath it. You gave me back my future when I thought it was lost forever." "You did the same for me," he said simply, pulling her closer. "We saved each other." As they drifted towards sleep in each other's arms, Lila thought of the long journey that had brought her to this moment, from the devastating fire to the train platform where she'd nearly been sent away, from the depths of grief to the heights of joy she now experienced. She would always carry her family in her heart. The pain of their loss would never completely vanish. But alongside that pain now bloomed a new life, rich with love and possibility. They had been wrong all those months ago: the doctor, the sheriff, the townspeople. She hadn't been crazy. She had been hurting. And in the arms of a cowboy who'd recognized that crucial difference, she had found not just healing, but a love to last a lifetime. Epilogue: 3 years later, the sound of laughter drew Lila from her gardening, shielding her eyes against the bright June sun as she watched her husband approach on horseback. In front of him, securely held in the saddle, sat their 2-year-old son, his dark hair and blue eyes a perfect blend of his parents', his chubby face alight with the joy of riding with his father. "Mama," little Matthew called, waving enthusiastically. "We saw deer, did you now?" Lila replied, setting aside her trowel and brushing soil from her skirts as she stood. "How exciting!" Adam reined in his horse, his face creasing in a smile that still made Lila's heart skip a beat after 3 years of marriage. "He's going to be a fine horseman," he declared proudly. "Got a natural seat already." Carefully dismounting while holding his son, Adam set the boy on his feet, watching indulgently as Matthew toddled toward his mother, chattering about the deer, the birds, and everything else they'd seen on their ride. Lila scooped him up, pressing a kiss to his son's warm cheek before meeting Adam's gaze over their son's head. The love she saw there was as steadfast and true as the day they'd wed, perhaps even deeper for the shared joys and challenges of marriage and parenthood. Mrs. Hollister appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her ever-present apron. "There's my boy," she called. "Come see what I've baked for your snack." Matthew wiggled to be set down, then raced toward the housekeeper with the single-minded determination of a child promised sweets. Mrs. Hollister, who had become a doting grandmother figure to the boy, welcomed him with open arms, shooting a meaningful glance at the young couple before ushering Matthew inside. Alone in the garden, Adam closed the distance between them, drawing Lila into his arms for a lingering kiss. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, his hand coming to rest gently on her stomach, where the slightest curve was just becoming visible. "Wonderful," Lila assured him, covering his hand with her own. "The morning's sickness seems to be passing, thank goodness." Adam's expression softened with tenderness. "Sarah's letter came while we were out. She'll be here next month to stay until after the baby arrives." "Good," Lila said, genuinely pleased. Her relationship with her sister-in-law had deepened into a true friendship over the years. "Matthew will be thrilled. He adores his Aunt Sarah." They walked toward the house hand in hand, pausing to admire the garden Lila had expanded each year, a riot of color and fragrance that had become her personal sanctuary. Among the flowers stood 3 small rose bushes, each marked with a simple stone bearing a name her father, mother, and brother. Not graves, for their remains rested in the Dallas cemetery, but memorials, places where she could feel close to them. "I was thinking about them today," Lila said softly, nodding toward the roses, "wondering what they would think of our life here." Adam squeezed her hand gently. "They would be proud of you," he said with certainty. "Proud of your strength, your resilience, the mother you've become." Lila smiled, the bittersweet pang of remembering now tempered by years of healing. "I think so too," she agreed, "and they would have loved you and Matthew." Inside, they found their son perched at the kitchen table, face smeared with raspberry jam, regaling Mrs. Hollister with an elaborately embellished tale of his morning adventure. The housekeeper, now in her 70s but still spry as ever, was listening with exaggerated amazement that delighted the boy. "And then, Papa let me hold the reins all by myself," Matthew declared, spreading his arms wide to demonstrate. "For about 3 seconds," Adam clarified with a chuckle, ruffling his son's hair. As Lila watched her family, for that's what they all were, bound by love if not always by blood, contentment washed through her. The journey from that terrible day at the train station to this moment had not been easy. There had been setbacks along the way, days when grief resurfaced with unexpected force, nights when old terrors revisited, but through it all, Adam had been her constant, her anchor. And gradually, the bad days had become less frequent, the good days more abundant, until joy was no longer the exception but the rule. Later that evening, after Matthew had been tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Lila and Adam sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. His arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, they savored the peaceful moment together. "I was thinking," Adam said quietly, "that we might invite Emily Collins to spend part of the summer with us. Her mother mentioned she's been having a hard time since her father passed. Might do her good to have a change of scenery." Lila looked up at him, heart swelling with love for this man who continued to see others' pain and offer compassion without hesitation. "That's a wonderful idea," she agreed. She and Matthew would have fun together, and perhaps being here would give her some peace. Adam pressed a kiss to her temple. "You taught me that, that healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in community, in love, and having someone who sees your pain and doesn't turn away." "I suppose we taught each other," Lila replied, thinking of how far they'd both come, he from the grief of losing his brother, she from the devastation of losing her entire family. Different journeys, but with a common destination, this life they'd built together, rich with purpose and love. As darkness settled fully over Broken Arrow Ranch, Adam and Lila retired to their bedroom, the same room that had once been her refuge when she first arrived, now their shared sanctuary. In the quiet intimacy of night, they whispered of hopes for their growing family, plans for the ranch's future, and gratitude for the present moment. And if, occasionally, Lila still woke in the night with the echoes of old nightmares, Adam was always there, his steady presence reminding her that she was safe, she was loved, she was home. In the end, that was the greatest gift they'd given each other, not just rescue from immediate danger, but the patient, enduring love that makes healing possible. For Lila hadn't been crazy that day on the train platform, just as Adam had known. She'd been hurting. And in the circle of his arms, in the life they'd created together, she had found not just an end to that hurt, but a joy deeper and more profound than she could have imagined. As she drifted towards sleep beside her husband, their unborn child nestled safely beneath her heart, Lila Thompson Ransom knew with absolute certainty that while tragedy had shaped her past, it would not define her future. That future belonged to love, and love, she had discovered, was stronger than even the deepest grief.